All right, it's rolling.
All right. Hey, AGB, how you doing, my
What's up,
buddy?
my brother? My brother. It's about time we got up on here together.
Yeah, we've been planning this out for a while. So one of the reasons I want to bring you out to my listeners and audiences, you are the person that is even more indignant than I am about this whole thing. I think I sent you that in a text at the very beginning of this whole thing.
Oh,
So we I think we see pretty closely eye to eye on what's going on here. Um, and maybe to a slightly different degree, or at least you're braver to say it. No,
I'm a little less
no,
polished.
I, I so I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've really enjoyed bouncing ideas off you and talking. One thing that we've done very well, I think, is that we've continued to have open dialogues with new data, and even just bringing in the fact that really smart people that we both respect disagree with us, and how can you hold those two things in your mind? That hey, this guy's crazy smart and a great researcher, and he totally disagrees with what I see going on here.
Mm.
So it's great to have somebody to bounce it off, and so I've really enjoyed that aspect. And what I've been trying to do for my audience, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist. I'm just a guy who has some background that's applicable here, and I'm trying to bring in other people that are in their own respective fields of expertise, and talk about basically here are the facts of what's going on,
Hmm.
and here's what we can do about it.
Yeah.
The way things currently are,
Right.
and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of beliefs out there.
What?
There's a lot of buzzwords going around. There's a lot of data with no denominators being thrown around.
Propaganda,
Um,
baby. The propaganda.
yeah, and there are very, very few facts.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to keep people like I think you said it on one of your videos that I loved it. Uh, the darkness is fear, and we're just trying to shine a light into the darkness so that you can see more clearly.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's listening, watching, Anthony and I both agree uh, that you should do your own research and not believe us either. We both have our own biases. We both have our own confirmation bias when we're doing research. So when we present things, we reserve the right to be wrong. And we're open to having dialogues. He and I don't agree on 100% of everything. That's the way intelligent people interact.
We
If
have
we were exactly
unfriended
the
each
same,
other.
one of us would be useless.
Right.
So let's dive into it. We are on day 965,285 of this whole lockdown thing.
Oh my God.
And what's going on in Florida? Are you guys locked down at all? Are you
Well, not
guys
locked down. So our great governor, DeSantis, he did issue a reduction of activity and movement guideline in there. It wasn't a lockdown per se. It hasn't been very military-esque or Democrat based. So the thing is essential activities, have not, are still exercise, walking, running, fishing, going to work, to and from, going to grocery stores, or caring for other people, kind of thing. Um,
so what type of businesses can be open if people are going to
well,
work?
grocery stores,
Okay,
liquor stores,
that's
marijuana dispensaries,
essential.
essential.
Abortion clinics,
Abortion clinics for these motherfuckers.
another essential service,
Oh my God.
but not hair
Hospital
care.
stuff like that.
You
But
can't get your haircut though.
no, no, man, no, close that down. But you know what? Here's the thing. That's so funny. Just a little funny sidebar on that. My my hairdresser Erica, she went down to Puerto Rico, came back. She's quarantined for 2 weeks, and so she referred me to one of her people who got me a quick cut before they shut it all down. So. But that doesn't
I
mean you got
I
to be
actually
all
just
ratchet either. You know what I mean? You could all these people are like, yeah, we're on day 5,000. Well, that'll keep you from shaving. I mean, talking
right.
about selling the despair.
Right.
Anyways,
I actually hired a local hairstylist and just said, hey, if you're willing to engage in the risk, come over to my house and cut my hair. So I just had a haircut in this chair right behind me yesterday, I
Nice.
think.
I was wondering why you're so damn pretty. You're always prettier than
Yeah,
a
man,
penny.
I know, looking good, looking fresh, man. Gotta keep it tight, man.
Gotta keep it
Keep it
tight.
high and tight.
Oh shit. So yeah, so that's the state of affairs in Florida. But you know what? What's really awesome is the fact that we've been hot and no rain. So
Mhm.
that does wonders for the numbers. Wonders.
Does
Now,
that heat have any? Does that hot, like that UV radiation, any of that sunlight stuff affect viruses at
well,
all?
I
As far
will
as you?
tell you, the models that were being used had it as an input possibility that we can move the slider on.
Oh, that's the New York Times one, right?
That's correct. You know,
Yeah.
you incorporate that, and that thing, even with an R naught of 3, which is ridiculous. We'll talk about that maybe. Brought
Yeah.
it down to like nothing, about 7,000 deaths, and that was back weeks ago.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I've been trying to put out. I got it's viciously mauled today on Twitter for suggesting that we might not know the exact R naught and the models aren't 100% useful. Do you still have me?
Yeah, I'm still there.
I
Yeah.
just lost the split screen. Did you do something different?
Boom, there we
Oh,
go. It clicked the thing off as I was clicking. My bad.
okay. I mean, I'd prefer not to see myself, but as long as everything's working,
No, it's
I'm
all on there.
cool.
It's technology. I was actually going through my numbers and stuff and verifying because you'd say what day we are. Today, the 13th, is technically day 28 of this debacle. Day 28.
Hey, can you pull up your spreadsheet that you have? I have spreadsheet envy. I hate spreadsheets, to be honest, which is
Sure.
why I didn't build one. But man, I'd really like to have the data you have
Yeah,
because
sure.
I.
I'll share it for like a champ. So let's just do that. I'll go like this here, and that's my spreadsheet. Yep. So I need to update it. I haven't put in yesterday's data, but we can
Okay.
zoom in here a little bit and kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, so we are. Uh, let's go to that top line, man, because I'd like to talk about the significance of this total cases, or total cases and or total uh, tests done,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
we've tested 2.6, almost 2.7 million people.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's gone up in another day, but not too off. But I mean, so forgive me for not having that in there, but that's exactly correct. This cell right here, total test,
yeah.
0.6 million tests.
Yeah. Now, do you have so? Let me share. Let me share my screen real quick. Um, here's a here's one that I love to point out here. Can you see my screen?
Yep, sure can.
All right. So, oh, come on, spread that out there, Lone. Give me some love.
Yep, no worries, man.
Um,
We're not a full-on video production.
yeah. Where's my Corona? Why want to go to coronavirus? Come on, baby. Population. It's frozen. Let me reload that. There we go. So this is something I've continued to point out. One, and I've seen you point this out as well. So across the entire damn world, we can see that it's always about 95% of mild conditions, which I point out that needs no medical attention whatsoever, other
Right.
than they've tested you and said, hey, drink some fluids and isolate yourself and whatever. And then you have this. These are the serious and critical. And something I keep pointing out is that the serious and critical, these are the only ones that could possibly fall into this, right? These mild conditions not going over into this.
Yeah.
So if of all the deaths, they're coming out of this serious and critical component, right?
Right.
And so something that I keep pointing out is, as much as we've tested, it's almost 3 million today. We've tested almost 3 million people, and we have a total of almost 600,000. But if you look, we only have 12,000 serious or critical, right?
Yeah.
And when we had half the number of cases, we had 9,500 serious and critical. So if you say, uh, if you buy into any of the data that, we're going to have 100,000 deaths or hundreds of thousands of deaths, well, those have to come from this pool.
That's
So
right.
even if we have 2,000 die, if we had 2,000 die per day, they're coming out of this 12,000 pool. So unless this 12,000 gets a lot bigger, we could possibly have 6 days of people dying at 2,000 per day the way it's going right now. Obviously, we've had some, and that would be 100% of the people dying, which that's not true, obviously, right?
Right.
So that's something I keep pointing out is like we have to pay a lot of attention to this serious and critical, and this is a number that we don't, we have to either trust all the data or none of the data. So
I agree. I agree with you. I like to actually use the data that they're talking. I disagree with the data. I think the test is bogus.
Right.
We'll get into that maybe later, but accepting the data which they have, we can kind of go for that.
Right. So if we're accepting this data and we say, okay, well, we have fewer than 13,000 cases right now. So this is our potential at risk of our population. Not insignificant, but come on, that's not a lot of people out of 330 million. Now, I know not everybody's exposed, and we've only tested 3 million, which I would submit is probably a hell of a lot higher percentage than we tested anyone else for any other thing. Given that these are very geographically focused as well, especially when you click on the U.S. and you can go down and look at how many of that's New York. 195,000 of the cases are in New York. I mean, that's you can organize it by cases. Like, all right, well, if you take out those three, East Coast right there, it's like, well, I mean,
But here's the thing, though, and this is what
80% of it.
Yeah, and aside from that, though, the thing for me is isn't it interesting that the cases go bonkers and the deaths go bonkers commensurate to where the testing is being done?
Right.
So here's the thing. If we stick to the official narrative, which I agree with to a certain degree, that this is the Wuhan, China SARS-CoV-2, okay, that it originated out of Wuhan.
Right.
That China lied about their numbers. Okay, I can agree with that to an extent. And here's the thing, but they knew about it back in October, November. They didn't say anything until December. Okay, Fauci himself said in January that we don't have anything to worry about. They shouldn't be worrying about it. That was out of Fauci's stuff. Then, of course, Trump comes out and says, hey, I'm going to, stop China. From Europe, people coming in and China. Everybody said, he was racist for doing that. So here's the thing. So for double the amount of time that we've been in this, I'm going to call it a hoax, this ruse, okay? The thing is that double that amount of time, there was still free travel everywhere and in the United States. And New York is not the only hub where people fly in from China. So let's not go ahead and spread out of the United States. Let's just go to California, okay?
Right.
We don't see this stuff going down in California.
LA is obviously a major hub as well.
Major hub. LA should
especially
just
from
be
China.
Decimated. San Francisco decimated. Okay? But Washington did. That happened before, whatever. Okay, let's just keep playing here. But it would have been way more. We would have seen the numbers way more. The only reason the numbers went up is because everybody was watching TV. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I showed videos over on my YouTube channel. I'm going to pop that up here at youtube.com/balance protocol, right? Where I actually showed the actual cell phone tracking data when this initially happened back in early March, where there's data companies that mine where everyone's phones are going. So they zoomed in down at Fort Lauderdale for spring break, and they showed all the phones. They did a circle around it, which will grab all signals from those. And you know what? I can probably bring that up here again if you want, because I think maybe people really should see that, because I have a whole file on this fun stuff. So yeah, let me play that for everybody. Okay, this is actually really fun to see. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll play this. Okay, so here's what happened. This is Tectonics. This is a company. It's a paid-for data mining service. Here they are zooming in on Florida. You can recognize, all the way down here at the tip. Okay, down here they're zooming in on Fort Lauderdale, classic spring break location. Okay, you can kind of see the timeline here, right? So this is down around the 1st and 2nd weeks of March. So we're coming in around the 1st. There's the 8th and the 15th. So then what happens is you can zoom in here and they can select all the spring breakers, right, on there. We circle those patterns and it will literally data mine and grab all those cell phones. Okay, so we type in here spring break spider, grab that. And then what it now does is it selects all the cell phones from that. And then we put this into motion, right? And then they go, okay, keep tracking them over time. Now watch what the spider happens. So see how that grows? So that was everybody who was on the beach in Fort Lauderdale that we grabbed, okay? And that's everywhere they went to all the cities on the East Coast, because everybody tends to, East Coast goes down to Florida and they go back up. So you kind of see how everybody went out like that. Now, this is kind of cool for two reasons.
How long of a period is that over?
That was a period from March, the beginning of March through, it tracked it out to March 22nd.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a form that the new term.
So that was over 3 weeks. Every phone on that Fort Lauderdale beach spread out to all those places that we saw.
That's correct. Okay. Because they were making the big hullabaloo, like, how come they're not, sheltering in place and all that kind of fun stuff.
Right.
Now, the scary thing about this is it recorded basically, you can kind of see the record count at the end, 870,000. Okay, so in other words, that's not people, that's how many records out and stuff like that. So they basically took a look at that number. So without getting on that, my point of it is this. That's scary for two reasons. Number one, people don't know that they've been tracked for years because people want to make decisions with data. I love data too. Like you and I talked about real early on. Let's take a look at history, let's look at data, and let's look at precedent. Because when you're trying to figure something out, like in law, we go to the legal precedent. Well, what do they do? We don't have to retry all these things. So when we're looking at confusion of what's going on with all these particular viruses, I use air quotes when I say virus, and what was the history tells us? It's very sobering, right? So if you take a look at the data of these, it shows you how connected people are. So here's what it does. To me, number one, gives you it doesn't scare me because I've been aware of it, but it shows you that you're trackable, okay? That's number one. People should know that. The second thing is that shows that people do spread, but people say, see, that's why we should social distance. That's why we should, isolate and quarantine. Here's what it tells me as a critical thinker like you, is to go, given that, why isn't it hella worse than what we're seeing? And if it did that from Fort Lauderdale, what if they did that from incoming cell phones over a period of time into San Francisco, LAX, John Wayne, San Diego, all these places that just have thousands of flights? If it truly was a huge R0, then we would have seen way worse. Because look, and if you come back to this
that
here,
has to speak to the R0. It's really hard to argue. Even if even if we're only talking about 20,000 phones, like spreading out all of that distance, an R0 of 3, assuming that some reasonable distribution of that beach was exposed to it. An R0 of 3 should, that's right. It's growing 3 times with every one person. So,
that's what I'm saying. So the numbers weren't adding up. The performance wasn't there.
Right.
The performance wasn't there.
And I know the R0's really hard to come by because the R0's an average, right? So if I keep telling people, if you own a 1,000-acre ranch in Wyoming, and you have the vid versus you're a delivery driver in New York City or a healthcare provider in New York City, something like your exposure has to be to a very large extent depending upon how many people you actually even, have the opportunity to infect. And so, you know, figuring out the R naught of the flu is even a really difficult thing to do. A lot of flu cases, I've learned since we've been digging in the research since this whole thing started. I've read a lot of CDC guidelines and a lot of their data on flu seasons. And one of the interesting things to me is that a lot of flu cases are assumed as well. Mm-hmm. They never have a positive test on them. They go, well, they had all the signs and symptoms of the flu, so we called that the flu, and we called that a flu death. Mm-hmm. Whether or not they actually, had clinical, laboratory diagnosis of it or laboratory positive on it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring up that cell phone thing, because this is something I don't believe we've talked about, and I found this out really early, and I think it's really intriguing. So just after we said we're going to accept the data that that's out there, yeah. The one interesting thing that I have seen, which gives me pause, because one thing I don't trust that the Chinese government was forthcoming and honest about this.
Yeah, there's precedent, I don't think history, and data proves that China lies.
I don't think anyone could say they're 100% confident in Chinese data. I mean,
right.
It's pretty obvious they haven't been honest about this. Right. But I saw a report really early on in this that when they were trying to figure out how many people they think actually died in China, and there was some stuff where they were looking at urns, how many urns, and how many hours a day the crematoriums were going, and things like that. But the most compelling thing that I saw was, I guess China makes every citizen register their cell phone with the government, with the country. I don't know if it's local, how they do it.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing they said was that since this pandemic started, well, at that time an epidemic, and supposedly just isolated to Wuhan, or pretty close to just being isolated, they've lost 21 million cell phone users in China. What do you think of that? I mean, that seems like, I don't think they have 21 million deaths. I mean, that would be completely unbelievable to me.
21
but
million,
I wonder why I know nothing about China. So I wonder why they have that large of a number. I mean, if it's sort of
I don't know where that's coming
tracking
from,
tool,
so I don't know. That makes me, I always go, whenever something doesn't compute, I literally change my brain and go, into an inquisitive mode, as opposed to call them bullshit mode reflex.
Yeah, so, I don't know if they I don't know if it could be financial. So many people got locked down, so many people lost their jobs, maybe couldn't afford their cell phone bills. How quickly would that shut off? I don't know what the government's policy on it, but I thought that was an interesting data point. I didn't know if you'd heard about it.
No, that's completely not on my radar. But here's the thing for me that made me question some stuff. So if we look at the map of China, and we see Wuhan right there in central, okay? So if we kind of zoom in on Wuhan, okay? It's a very filthy area, extremely filthy when it comes to air pollution. It's known for that. At the time, back there in the fall, there was a whole bunch of protests going on there, okay? Tons of protests. And to the north, straight above, to the main city of Beijing, okay? The interesting thing is there wasn't the disease states. In other words, the cases weren't happening there. It was just there. And for the month prior to, it didn't go all the way crazy. It didn't go to Mongolia. It started to go to little, Vietnam. But it didn't go through the whole country, right? It was just Wuhan. If you take a look at the number and the tracking and the reporting. Now, and again, do we go with China's reporting numbers or not? It's a tough place, but looking at that, my thing is that just makes me go, okay, if this was so transmittable and just viral, why on earth didn't we see more of that? And if it did, okay, there's a lot of flights coming out of Shanghai to the United States, Beijing, okay, Shenzhen, and all these other places, Taiwan, we would have seen way more. Okay, that's what I'm saying. So in other words, it would have hit us so fast and furious. We would have been seeing cases like crazy in December, crazy in January, crazy in February. Now, that's my thing. I don't know about the cell phone loss of that stuff, but what was interesting to me, okay, is what I take a look at is the study here published in the New England Journal of Medicine. We, as doctors, we know about them. Look at the author here. That's Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's Anthony Fauci. So one of the things we have to understand here is this was in February. Now, there's a couple of them. Go sidebar here, Doc, if you'll just give me a little latitude. What's really interesting here is it was rapidly shown to be caused by a novel coronavirus that is structurally related to the virus that causes SARS. Now, one thing people have to remember SARS back in 02, 03? Okay?
Yep.
That was a coronavirus.
Right.
MERS in 2012. That is a coronavirus. Now, I want you to notice something. Remember back then, it was called MERS stands for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. So, sidebar, everybody's all up in arms of it's racist, right? You didn't hear him say anything any racist back then, right? When Obama was in power, it wasn't racist then. I'm sorry. This is why I have such fun and comfort with these things, because I go, well, what did history do then? All right. So, two previous viruses, okay, that swept the world, they were coronaviruses. This one is supposedly akin to that. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So now here's the thing. Remember, structurally the same. When we do the test, we're only looking at about 200 to 300 base pairs of a 30,000. Okay, so this is why that test is non-specific. I personally believe, little spoiler alert, that they're testing positive in people who had exposure to this back in the day. Okay, but aside from that, here's the funny thing.
I think it's completely reasonable to say that if somebody has any coronavirus in their bloodstream, and that's restricted to mammals and birds, and they don't typically go into humans, but obviously the common cold is a coronavirus, and SARS and MERS, like these are coronaviruses.
Yes.
And if this PCR test is showing up, well, that's what we're testing for, this mRNA, and we're looking for this little sequence, and that's in coronaviruses. Now, the question is, okay, so are we saying that maybe there's more people dying from SARS, or more people dying from MERS, or more people dying from the common cold? And I say no. All I'm saying is that, I could have the common cold right now, right? I could have a common cold coronavirus right now and not really know it. Mm-hmm. And we are at the tail end of the flu season, so there's a real chance of cross contamination with these tests.
100%, and I'm going to show that on the screen here, Doc. Check this out. Okay, so what this is a in Nature. Okay, prestigious. We all know who they are. So proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. Here's the thing. They talk about the genome. You guys can go look this up if anybody wants to go see it. But here's what it is. Here's the figure. This is it. This is the thing that substantiates what we're saying. Okay? And for those of you in lay folks, you see that big long blue line up there? Okay? That's the genome. Okay? This is the full nucleotide. And you can see the little spike up here, the little appendage. So in other words, it has various domains that we look at. Okay. Now, what I want to zoom in on is
they're actually looking at the genome of the spike that's on the outside of the virus that's attaching to some.
That's correct. Right. Okay. So you see, I'm going to zoom in on. Okay. So you see the lines that come off of this one little section, which is technically 4,000 base pairs. So we zoom out. Okay. So you see that's the subunit that we're looking on. Then we go in further. Okay, and we zoom in and we can see another section right here, okay, and then another section here. So look at the names of these. So you're seeing that these, where they're selecting these particular areas. Now, why that's important is because right here, that little receptor binding domain, this is how we know that it can bind to the ACE2 receptor, okay? All of these viruses can. Okay? Same in the bat, same in the pangolin, same with SARS-CoV, which we've seen in the past. Here's 2. And they start looking at which ones are probable connections to the past. So if you want to look at these and understand where we're coming from, it's such a small, look at that, about 100 base pairs there, about 50 there. So I give a larger spread.
So look at that top. Can you go back to that top line? When we're looking off to the right with the O-linked glycan residues,
right?
So you have there's obviously SARS-1 and SARS-2 in there, and it looks like from 680 to whatever 686, they're showing if that's a unique sequence, or they don't have
not unique,
so
in common. All the rest is unique. We're talking about less than 200 to 300 base pairs. Remember, base pairs are, G, A, T, and C, right? So we know that when it comes to little rungs on the ladder, those are the base pairs.
Right.
G and C always go together. A and T always go together.
So that's the common area. So just the parts that are highlighted here from whatever that is, 660 something.
That 660 up to about 700.
That's a unique sequence. And then
no, not unique sequence. Those are common to those 6.
Well, because I'm looking at the actual code. So if you look at SARS-1
down at the bottom,
it's identical up until that first histine orange one right there.
Right.
And then,
well, there's multiple places that the cleavages come together. So in other words, you've got the O-linked glycan residues. We're not going to get into that, but you've got within that is the polybasic cleavage site, but then also you've got the ACE2 domain receptor sites. Okay.
Right.
So there's 2 different places within the spike genome, okay, that they're testing for. The take home here for this is, for people looking at this, is we're looking at a almost 3,000 base pair genome and grabbing out just a couple of hundred base pair sequences that could be these other viruses, species, that we've had for 2 damn decades. So it's a non-specific test. In order to do a RT-PCR, you have to have a template. You have to say, okay, what are we going to amplify? What are we going to stick into the little PCR machine? Add in a little a protease enzyme that we get from a heat-stabilized bacteria. Okay, it's called a TAC enzyme, TAC protease. Right. TAC is short for the thermal. Basically, it's an excretion from a bacteria that's heat stable that splits DNA. So we have to mix that in with the other reagents, some free nucleotides, a couple of other little chemicals, and we basically raise the temperature to get that enzyme to split that DNA in half, then say, hey, cool it down. It's called annealing. And then we put in stuff, and then it will automatically grab the nucleotides that are free and make a DNA strand. So we take one, a template, split it, and then make 2, and then we do that through what's called cycles. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, because this is really important, in that people need to understand the test, because all these cases that are reported globally, and particularly in the United States, is a combination of those who have been tested and others that are presumed based upon symptoms that are not specific to this. So it's not all those cases were not tested, even though we tested 2.6 million. Some of the cases being reported are presumed, not confirmed by the test.
Right. And that makes that serious and critical case load harder to
can't even stomach that
track
either.
As well. But so the counter argument that I've heard though is that New York is having, I want to say, almost 200 to 300 deaths outside of the hospital, people dying at their homes every day.
Yep.
And so they're going out and testing these people and aren't testing them.
Yep.
So they're saying you're underreporting if these people are dying from COVID, and we don't know if they're dying from COVID.
Exactly.
We don't know if they're dying with COVID, much less from COVID.
Well, and in that, here's the thing. Statistically, New York City has it can be a low number, 2 to 400 deaths, wait for it, a day.
Right. Now, I don't know the data. Have you looked in to see like what is their overall death rate?
Yeah, 2
per
to 400
day?
a day. Now I didn't splice it out into specific cause because it
Right,
didn't.
right. Well, my question is it, so let's just say New York averages 300 per day. Have we added, these 400 to 500 corona, have we added that to the 300, or is this now the new total? So what, in other words, what they're reporting here on worldometers, so New York saying that 671 deaths, all right, 758 deaths in New York yesterday from COVID. Is that plus 300, or do we know, have all the other causes dropped down to 100, and so it's killed 200 people that likely would have died from something else on average, or do you know that?
I don't know that. I
Okay.
don't have a place where that comes into it, to it breaks it out.
Okay.
I just went to New York state and city of what they're actually reporting when it comes to deaths.
And so have you seen what it currently is? Have you seen like what
No,
their
I haven't
current
checked
death?
back in a few days. Truth be
Okay,
told.
but so a few days ago, was there 700 plus the average, or was it 700 total? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know the answer
Okay.
to that one. What I'm going to pull up here real quick is I'm going to pull up, see if I can find it here. That's such a big file of so much stuff. So basically, what I'm getting at is that there's multiple things to take into consideration to understand this and form a hypothesis, right? So for me, I'm going number one. If it was as viral as they said, because that's, remember, where we're kind of coming back to what we were saying of if the R naught or the passability. Sorry, let me hit these files. Was the case, we would have seen way more instances that even in the absence of testing being available at early on that time, we would have had reports of a ton of people. Okay,
Yeah. Well,
we didn't
and
have that.
the other thing is that I've seen data on, I want to say, or I haven't seen the data, but I've heard a report on the data. I want to say it was Michigan that was doing some really extensive antibody testing, and they were finding that 30% of the people already had antibodies to this.
Yes, and
I'm
I'm trying to,
assuming
my
IgG.
explanation, no one has said it yet that I know of. It's because the test is non-specific. It's only about 20% accurate for specificity. Why? Because
The
of the
antibody
genome.
test you're talking about, or are you talking about the antibody test, or are
No,
you
I'm not talking
talking
about the
about
antibody test. I'm actually talking about the
the
RT-PCR.
yeah, the PCR?
But here's the thing with the antibody test. Same thing. It's not specific because remember, their receptor domain is shared. So the antibody is going to test positive for correction for the receiver of the antibody does to their receiver. So
Yes.
antibody tests are to the receptor binding sites, not
Yeah.
to
So
the
that,
whole genome.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So because all
I'm
these
with you.
species of coronavirus and some other bacteria, by the way,
Right.
you want to get another that rabbit hole, share the same receptor. This is why we knew that it was an ACE2 and everybody was freaking out about the pneumonia, explaining that kind of fun stuff. So it's
Right.
non-specific. That non-specific means the antibody test from Abbott, the same ones who did the HIV scam later, I'll tell you that another time. It's a non-specific antibody test. It can't be. And of course, we're going to see a whole bunch of people test for the antibody, and they go, yeah, we've had huge herd immunity. Why? Because it's shared with all these other coronavirus species, which is why Fauci, back to this New England Journal of Medicine ad back in February, he said that this suggests that the overall clinical consensus of COVID-19 may ultimately be more akin to those with severe seasonal influenza, which has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%. Now listen, that's not 10. That's 0.1. When they put the percent there, that means it's 0.1%. Or a pandemic influenza similar to those to SARS and MERS. Okay? So in other words, it says the current study indicates an estimated basic reproduction number R naught of 2.2. Okay? Now, when you plug that into the model, that only equaled approximately 45,000 deaths in the United States. So here's what I did in early March. I said, okay, Maverick, you're at 0.2 of a mile, call the ball. So I called the ball and I said, okay, 40,000 deaths, which is that's only 2/3 of the seasonal flu anyway. So I went with Fauci's number because this is all I had at that time. And I went, why the hell are you telling people 2.4 million deaths? Freaking people the hell out. And then that got reduced to 1 million and then 500. And I kept going on this initial one because they were going on initial reports. We knew this.
Right.
And guess what? Guess what's going to happen by March? And you and I, man, and sidebar for people who didn't know it. Kirk and I, we had such a fun time checking in each day going, dude, am I missing something? Are you missing something? We can't be missing nothing. I know we're dudes and we might miss some things and we got a bunch of letters at the end of our names and stuff like that. So sometimes we might have some bias. But we're going, it's not going to get there. And it was so comforting to bounce that stuff off of you and go, yeah. So
I think we were both saying about 30,000 was kind of.
Yes.
To be fair, I'm like pulling that out of my butt. Like I don't have a rationale for that other than just saying, okay, looking back historically, what's happened, and that's something I wanted. I don't know if I've shared this with you.
Yeah, you got a great flu review. Pull that up.
Yeah, so let's pull this up. This one here. This is one that I keep coming back to also, and you sent me this page initially, and I played around with it for hours because I'm a nerd. So this is our flu season, currently down here at the bottom, and that flu season is going away, obviously, right?
Right. So just so people can see, put your up there in the top left-hand corner. You can see the season is 2019 through 20.
Yeah, and so what I did is I went back here and said, well, what's the most recent thing, right? The most recent thing was the swine flu, right?
Yep,
so 08, 09.
So hey Doc, wasn't that when Obama shut the entire planet down? Didn't
right?
Remember that, everybody? Remember when the whole economy got all locked up for how many deaths?
So these are positive tests. I don't have the death toll, but if you look at this positive test, obviously it's a ratio to the death rate. So the interesting thing though is that the flu season ends. It ends down here, and then we get this second one because the swine flu didn't have any seasonality.
Right.
And there's a possibility this may not have seasonality, but let's look. So that's the 08, 09, and then 09, 010, the continuation of that. We get this other spike here. Again, that's all swine flu. All the subtyping has been done. As denoted by the color. Yeah, so the orange is H1N1. And then look at the following flu season. The flu season usually starts around here, right?
Yep.
In the late 40s weeks, and then it goes out here to like the 12th week, 14th week, something around that. And there's none. There's none. So what this is telling me is like, hey, everybody who is really susceptible to getting majorly ill, so ill that they're going to the hospital and getting tested or the doctors are getting tested, we encapsulated all those people from January 1 of 08 or of 09 and then out to, right before. At some point in kind of December, that all died out. So all of those people got super sick, and then no one got sick anymore in this normal flu season.
Right.
And I think it's very logical to say, if you look at all these subtypes down here, there's this flu season, as they call it, is made up by a lot of stuff. And so it's very reasonable to say, well, the coronavirus could just be built into this. Because if you track this out, so this is the first time this has ever been a problem, H1N1, right?
Right.
But now go back to last year, same color scheme. Look how many of the flu cases were actually H1N1 of this completely novel virus, and it didn't extend. It had seasonality that time.
Correct.
The year before, it's hardly existent. That year, it's big. Now look at the current year. How much orange in there, man? It's the majority H1N1, and it's following the same seasonality, which makes you believe that the seasonality is more due to behavior and weather than the actual virus. I don't know what other conclusion you could bring from that, because it had no seasonality when it first came out, and now it does have seasonality aligned with the same times we always get sick.
You got
it. I mean, I think that's important. That's important data that can't be overlooked. I'm not saying my interpretation of the data is necessarily perfect, but that data has to be considered. I mean, that's playing into this craziness.
I agree. And here's one of the things I love to do. And you and I, like we said at the beginning, we always encourage people, don't believe us, go do your own research. Well, a great little read for people to go, okay, and look up is a book called Swine Flu Exposed by Eleanor McBean, PhD, ND. Of course, some people are going like, oh, you NDs, like back, all right. But really cool read. It's actually free online. Let me see if I can even let me just see if I can put this here real quick, and let me just plop it in as a little graphic here for everybody so we could see that. Okay, so I'm gonna put that over here on your side. Okay, so that's the address that you can go and read this book for free. You don't even have to buy it. Okay, whale.to/whatever. Okay, so they can go and do that. And the interesting thing about this book is it also gets into the history of vaccines and the 1918 swine flu, and gives the data and the well-documented fact that the deaths of that pandemic were directly related and correlated to, wait for it, the vaccination that they rushed to get it together. They just same thing like with polio. So there's a lot of history in that, not to go all controversial and everything.
Right. So they're, that's one of the reasons they're saying it's going to be 18 months, 12 months to 18 months to get a vaccine. But I'd like to dip into that and point out that we don't have a vaccine for any coronavirus, including SARS and MERS, which have a very high
and have been around for decades.
Right. So if
the reason why is because it's non-specific.
If we're definitely going to get a vaccine, and we're confident we're going to get a vaccine, why don't we have it to any other coronavirus? And I'll step back and say, I don't know, and we're not going to know the answer to that, why they think they can do this one and not another one. But it begs the question, what if we don't get a vaccine?
Great.
What do we do? I mean, and I know you're not a fan of vaccines, but let's just, I'm talking about from a policy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If the ace in the hole is that we're going to vaccinate anybody who's susceptible, and that's another thing that isn't built well into the models, is you have to have susceptibility. Not everybody is as susceptible to anything, regardless of what's causing any pandemic. Not everybody's equally susceptible. Mm-hmm. It's the whole concept of the herd immunity. But I digress. If we're saying that the vaccine is going to be the savior because we're going to get some herd immunity, and then everybody who's susceptible, these elderly people with, elderly and infirm people with multiple or severe comorbidities, pre-existing conditions, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. Well, if that's the ace in the hole, that vaccine doesn't come. We can't very well get herd immunity by exposing a bunch of susceptible people who might die from it. Right. So then how do we, from a medical standpoint, medical advisory, say to the policymakers, so politicians, how do you credibly say, we see an end to this, like we see a way out of this isolation? If we're banking on the fact that isolating ourselves is making all the difference, mm-hmm. and a vaccine is 12 to 18 months away, if a vaccine even can be made for coronavirus successfully. Are we just not going to work for 18 months? Are we going to
Yeah,
isolate for
it's not
18 months?
sustainable.
I mean, so we have to have like some sort of medical approach. And to me, the logical thing is, all right, quarantine the people that you're really worried about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get it. I mean,
Well,
I
I
get
don't
it.
say
There's gonna be
quarantine them.
50, I mean, I get it. There's going to be 50 and 60-year-olds built into that. You know, there are plenty of 60-year-olds who, 65-year-olds who run businesses and, you know, are going to, you know, and are part of the workforce. So I get that. But we're talking about 100% of the workforce right now. So if we lose 20% of the workforce to quarantine, we can, you know, we can even maybe make up some of the difference and maybe get 90% of the economy going with 80% of the people.
I agree.
So to me, I mean, that's the concerning bit, right? The concerning bit is we've bought into this, regardless of anybody's listening, their opinion on whether this thing is. Now, obviously, like I have actually a patient that you and I share. I won't say her name, but you and I have both consulted on a woman in New York City who's had COVID, and she's had three close friends whose fathers have died in this last couple of weeks. So there's something going on. I'm not sitting here saying there's nothing going on. I don't think we know. I don't think we exactly know how much of this is, you know, complications from COVID. Like what's the actual death toll of COVID? Let's just give it the data that's out there on worldometers. You know, is that enough to completely shut down the economy? You know, as a medical provider, I see the guys out there. I see the doctors out there, and we're trained obviously to think.
Yeah.
You know, as a medical doctor, like I'm supposed to save all life. All life is equally as precious, and so I do no harm by never engaging in anything that could hurt somebody.
Right.
Well, there's risk to being in society. There's risk to putting the economy back in order. There's risk to driving your car. There's risk to drinking alcohol. There's risk to saying, "Here, hold my beer." Everything that comes after that, right?
Yep.
I mean, so there is inherent risk in life. In fact, to live a life, you have to risk death.
Yeah.
And so, the thing that's concerning to me, and this is, you know, I'll admit this is outside of my scope, as somebody who's being affected by this, it's concerning to me that I don't see any way that we can develop a policy that's going to be risk free. And if we can't, then what's the metric? Like, where's the point where we say, okay, we've had enough of this. We're going back and we're willing to risk X number of lives, or
right. Well, and that's where I'm always going to go back to our mantra, right? Which is history, data, and precedent. How have we survived up until now? So
I mean, the human species survived a lot of viruses, obviously.
Yeah. So let's look at that. So let's go to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And what I'm bringing up is what's called the disease burden of influenza. Okay. Talks about how the CDC establishes the burden of flu. Okay. And why, estimated season, all these questions. So here's what they say. So we know historically, okay. So let's just go back, okay, last year, okay. So now remember, it takes a couple years for everything to all pan out, okay. So 2018 to 2019, okay, 35 million symptomatic illnesses. So here's what I know. We know that historically, okay, last year, when no one ever heard of social distancing or any of these terms, we had 35 million. I feel like, you know, little mini me, $1 million, right? So then with that, what came along with that? Well, what about the hospitalizations? Oh, that's a great question. Let's go to medical visits, okay? 16 million medical visits. Now, what does that mean? Some doctors who had offices, you go to your primary care provider. Some ladies are going to go to the gynecologist. Men, you know, we only go to our cardiologist or a proctologist. Anyways, so we were able to handle 35 million illnesses, 16 million medical visits. But what about hospitalizations? We weren't overrun by 490,000 hospitalizations. That's way more than what we've seen here in this hoax. Just last year, and no one was calling for ventilators. Okay.
Yeah,
But what
so
about,
that's
hold on a second, let me
so
keep going
I
here.
would see the argument to that being, well, the flu season is over a year, and
No,
we're,
sir. It's from October to March.
well,
So
the
here's the
peak is
deal.
from
Let me show
October to
one last
March.
number, then we can get into
The
it.
the
Last
peak is
year,
from October to
34.
March. The entire year is counted. If you look at those charts, it goes from week 40, I think.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, okay, in other words, you can look at the numbers, but it's still pushed into a certain period of time relatively where the bulk happens
Yeah,
because,
and I agree that 90% of those cases and deaths are happening with probably within a 4 to 5 month span.
I agree that this supposed COVID-19, I'm calling it, a fraud, has some things happen. But last year, we had 34,157 deaths,
Right.
and no one said bupkis. We
Right.
had
And
a
that,
500,000 hospitalizations, and no one said bupkis. So what does that tell us? No matter what the disease is, we have the capacity to handle it. We don't need a policy change. We don't need a vaccine. You see what I'm saying? That's the
right.
whole thing. And that's just last year. It gets worse for the previous years. Oh my God.
Right.
Heaven
And
help
well,
us. If,
and the thing that I've pointed out too when I've gone to the flu view data is that once you incorporated H1N1 into the seasonal curves,
yep.
which, to be clear, anyone listening, essentially these are all dying in pneumonia-like illnesses, right?
Yeah.
So once you wrap the H1N1 in there, and as we went through a few years, H1N1 sometimes makes up the majority of that season, sometimes a very small portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall area under the curve doesn't change statistically, right? So the fact that we've added in SARS and MERS and H1N1 into these influenza-like illnesses and influenza deaths, or the deaths under the category of influenza-like illness, that total number is always between 30,000 and 60,000 per year. And so it's very likely, I think, that the COVID, all right, so maybe it is more contagious and it's causing symptoms that we don't know how to deal with and we don't have as much treatment and maybe it's happening faster. And so we are going to lose people right now and possibly early, later this spring and maybe early this summer. But then it's very likely that we're going to see the same thing that we saw with H1N1 is like almost a non-existent flu season coming up. And we're going to end up with the same number of susceptible people. And let's be honest, the number one risk factor for death is age.
That's correct.
Regardless
Everybody
of
universally accepts that.
If you're 70 or 80 or 85 plus or even 60, 70, 80, like the odds of you dying is a lot.
Yeah.
I don't want to say exponentially, but it's a lot greater. It's many multiples greater every decade you get older. And so these deaths are going to happen, whether it's from COVID or it's from influenza or if it's from falls or if it's, from dementia or if it's from, aspirating in their sleep and causing, pneumonias that way. Like we don't like comorbidities obviously stack up as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very likely that that there is something unique. I mean, it's certain that there's something unique going on right now that's causing some deaths in a way that we wouldn't otherwise expect.
I would disagree on that.
Okay, well,
that'd be one of our points that I think I would disagree on. I don't think anything special is going on at all.
Well, let's say that every death that's been recorded for COVID would have happened anyway.
Okay.
Well, let's just say that would happen. The fact that they've tied it to a COVID is unique.
Okay,
and
that's true.
The fact that they've tied it to a symptomatology that they're unfamiliar with.
But see again, that's the presupposition. So they say we're
not.
Well,
so here's the most compelling thing to me out of that, and I understand the arguments for this could be real, but this could be the normal thing. But if you look at the number of people who survive ventilation from the regular flu, it's a lot higher than people who've survived ventilation with COVID.
Correct.
So it seems like ventilation, for whatever this is, whether you say this, isn't whatever.
Right.
The people who are surviving, the people who are going on ventilators are not surviving this as well as
Correct.
other respiratory illnesses.
Yeah.
So there has to be something unique about it that's causing. I'll grant you the nocebo for getting into extremis. I don't think once you're in a medically induced coma that nocebo is playing a factor.
Okay, and I'm with you. So I've been thinking about that because the first thing I always do is there or is there not a symptom or a clinical presentation that is just isolated to said thing? What differentiates it? Okay. Now,
Right.
as far as symptoms, there are none. Response to ventilation from intubation? Yes, there is. So then we got to go, aha, what's going on here? So I say aha because over in Israel they've been doing some studies. So I say that now, not about you. Anyways, so what they're doing is taking a look at some of the data points, and here's some of the things that are starting to tie some stuff in, for me to be able to, kind of speculate what could be in play. All right.
And where's this? What's the source of this data? I know it's Israel, but is this from their CDC equivalent, or is this newspapers?
Nope. I'm going to put it on screen. Okay. They're analyzing the data from something published in The Lancet called Clinical Course and Risk Factors of Mortality of Adult Patients with COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, a retrospective cohort study. So they're taking a look at the data points. Okay, so they're taking a look at that. Remember, we had the NHANES. Right. And we that's a big ass data set from years ago, and right. The Women's Health Initiative, and we've been recycling that crap forever. Okay, so
Women's Health Initiative is the worst thing that's happened to America.
Oh well, my God, right?
This is worse.
But there's data points.
Yeah.
For instance, it's like when my wife, she has her master's in criminal justice, right? So she was doing the studies and things are like, well, what they found is that we had this uptick in ice cream sales in whatever city it was with deaths and crime. And they're like, well, hold on a second. Is people eating ice cream? So causation, correlation. But my point is this. When you expand the data points, you get different interpretations, okay? Right. Perturbations or whatever. So here's one of the things that we were taking a look at. Is when I did, and I'm not going to show it on because you really can't see it. But one of the things is they were taking a look at the ferritin levels because they're doing blood work. As those of us who aren't doctors like this, we know we're going to do some standard CBC and some levels and stuff like that on any patient that gets hospitalized. We're just going to draw your shit and we're going to take a look at it. So they're taking a look at those data points that were thrown in there. One particular one is ferritin, which is the storage form of iron in the blood, okay? Which tells us, then we take a look at iron in the hemoglobin, right? So here's the thing. We know that molecule binds to oxygen and facilitates the transport from the lungs via the arteries to cells in the body. Okay, brief little medical lesson. Okay.
Yeah.
Not bad for someone who's not a real doctor, as they say. Like, us naturopaths and doctors of organic medicine, we're not real doctors like you MDs. Anyways,
that's all right, man.
I'm just a guy on a camera. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But I've read a couple of books. All right, so here's the thing. 20 years of clinical medical experience, I've done lots of blood draws. Okay, anyway, here's my point. What they were seeing is extremely high levels of ferritin in these blood levels of these patients who are dying of the illness. So what would that mean? Okay, if you saw these videos of people, they had the doctor who was in New York City that said, hey, listen, people who are being intubated are dying. I don't know. We should not be putting them on these ventilators and pushing that in there to breathe for them or not. There's another thing where people were starting to complain of this buzzing or tingling sensation. So that's independent to these things. So this makes all the 5G people go, see, it's 5G. Now, but why 5G? I don't think it's the 5G per se, but is it a possible component? Sure, because 5G millimeter wave specifically affects iron excess in the blood and the way that the blood cells oxygenate. Okay, this is why some people can be around 5G and have no problem.
So if 5G were a component, and I just realized why this is blurry, I'm on Wi-Fi, I'm supposed to be hardlined in, so sorry for
Shame on you for hitting that microwaves. Okay.
Yeah, so why wouldn't we then see a much higher probability of getting this illness if you lived within X distance of a cell phone tower?
Great question. And here's my thing. Being a guy who's been teaching EMF mitigation for 26 years before it was cool for school, okay, who has an entire course on it. The thing is this, because the target, the terrain is a cofactor in the actual radiation species. So my point is, there are some people that are not going to have a problem with microwave radiation on them. Okay? Kids don't have that kind of problem that we're seeing in these other folks because they haven't lived long enough to have high ferritin levels and other things. Potassium, magnesium, there's more to it. I'm not overly simplifying it, but here's my working hypothesis. I do know the danger.
What's the difference? I'm ignorant here. What's the difference in the ferritin level, and a pediatric level, let's say a 10-year-old, relative to an adult?
Dynamically higher. Most kids are going to have ferritin levels somewhere in the 50s to 70, maybe 100 range. These people, it's double and triple that. Okay? Because as you get older, number one, iron is very difficult to get rid of. Ladies have ability because they have a menses. Okay?
Right.
But old people will retain iron like nobody's business because their copper and zinc ratio is off. There's all these other if then go tos. But my point is this. If you have excess ferritin levels in your blood, you are going to be more susceptible, okay, to the deleterious effects of microwave radiation emitted from 5G towers.
I'm suspect on that one,
and
man.
That's okay. Hey, I'm suspect too, just for the record.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the point is that we do know that even in the absence of microwave radiation, just take the tower part of it out. Just omit that. I'm just giving credence to what a big narrative is out there, okay? Excessive ferritin happens in people with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. It is an inflammatory marker, okay?
Right.
It is a response element. The body's trying to mitigate a bioelectrical charge, okay? So what I'm saying is, it is an inflammatory marker in and of itself, just like CRP and homocysteine and everything. It's just one of the tails of the tape. So it shouldn't be there anyways, okay? In other words, there's a certain level too. I mean, if you have ferritin of 15, your thyroid's not working. There's a sweet range between about 50 to 100 that thyroid's only going to work if you have enough ferritin. If it's low, anyway. So my point is this. It is a factor that's well established. When they're taking a look at the data sets, they're finding that these people, and isn't it interesting that people who are elderly have a longer history of comorbidity and pre-existing conditions that also correlate with a known common thread of excess ferritin. So when you start intubating them and pushing oxygen in there, you're creating a problem. They need oxygen, but you shouldn't be doing it under pressure.
But you're still intubating elderly people with the flu, and they still are going to have high ferritin levels. True. They do much better off ventilation than a COVID patient.
Well, here's what I'm finding. It's that they don't intubate pneumonia by rate that they were seeing now. It became a narrative. By the demand for ventilators preventatively, they said, well, shit, we should be using them.
Right. Well, yeah, and actually I just did one of these with another physician friend of mine who's an ER doc out here. And he said that the guidance they're getting is changing about every 48 hours. And when this started, it was like as soon as somebody looked like they're struggling, they intubated them, and then they're like, "Oh, those people aren't making it off the ventilators." And now they're like, "Hey, until that person's about to die in front of you, don't put them on a ventilator."
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing with that, and we know this in medicine, right? You do your rotations and stuff. The bottom line is this: the narrative that the media spun up was that it's very contagious and aerosols. That's all bullshit, by the way. They said, well, assuming that is true, we want to stick a tube down their mouth, and then now they're not going to be aerosolization and spitting it out into the air from their coughs and stuff. And we don't have any enough PPE, and we don't want that on us. So as a justification to intubate prematurely was under the ruse of those things that I just talked about. So then now add that.
They were saying that R naught was like 3 to 5 or something, right? When this thing started out.
Yes, that's it. That was the range. And so
Which
they were telling
super
everybody that it lives all these days, even though viruses don't live. And so that was what the doctors were told. Preemptive, and I was getting it from nurses, real time, not second party, first parties. And I'm like, well, hey, are there a bunch of people dying, bodies stacking up? No. Are we overrun? No. Is it stressful? Yeah. You working long hours? Yeah. But here's the deal. They were saying...
You sleeping well?
I know. Screw sleeping. Yeah, that doesn't do anything for the immune system, does it, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's correlation at all.
Not a little bit. Some people might have made a whole career out of that one truth. But here's the thing. Then Senator Dr. Scott Jensen, right, up in Minnesota, he went on TV and said, hey, here's the thing. Follow the money. And the thing was, Medicare said that if you have a COVID-19 admission, they're going to give you $13,000 for it. If you put them on a ventilator, you get how much? $39,000. So 3 times the amount by taking a COVID patient, not confirmed by test, by the way, one that you just go ahead and say. So what does that tell us? There was another incentive to put people on ventilators, and it's called 39,000 Reasons Why.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm a doctor working in the hospital, I mean, to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, I find it really hard to believe that I personally, as the healthcare provider, would say, "Oh, I'm going to put this guy on a ventilator to make more money for the hospital."
Well,
I mean, I think
you are way more
doctors...
forgiving, my friend. You are enlightened. My halo is a little click to the left, and so I'm going to tell you, man.
Yeah. So
what if it's discretionary? In other words, like, just to be safe. Not just because of the money. I don't think they're going, all the hospital administrators are there going, oh, get everybody on a ventilator as much as you can. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I've seen situations where people are under extremism and people are scared, and they do odd things. So I think I completely buy into the concept that it's probably really hard to quantify how people are being marked as deaths from COVID. Like that to me, like there's high suggestibility to that. There's social pressure. There's peer pressure. Like I could see that being, well, it could be this, could be that, but I'm just going to hedge on. And and if that happens, once or twice, it's no big deal. If that happens 400 times a day and you've hedged incorrectly, across all these medical centers everywhere, if they've hedged incorrectly 400 times a day or 200 of those 400 times, well, then that's 200 additional deaths being attributed. That's not insignificant when you're talking about 20, 30 days of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'll buy into that.
The CDC and those guys, they were saying the data is that it was already here in November.
Well, I mean, we know we had our first death in America in January, right? We had January 21st, I think, was our first death.
Okay, then why 60 days later?
Right.
What happened to all of February?
And the data that I've seen is that there were nearly 1 million people that flew from China to the United States. Is 880 some odd thousand people had flown from China to the United States before we shut down before President Trump shut that flight down, or those shut the country down as being able to fly in. So if this thing has an R naught of 3 to 5, and you have 880,000 people coming in, then it wouldn't take too many infected people to say we had a substantial number of this. And I know that in retrospect, a lot of physicians are looking back and saying, I did have these really strange flu cases that I couldn't explain. And I kept swabbing them and re-swabbing them, and I couldn't figure out why they didn't have the flu, because everything met this flu. To your point of, that it's really hard to say these symptoms are diagnostic of a disease, because there's a lot of cross pollination
Correct. Yeah.
of symptoms across various diseases. So I mean, I think it's almost certain that we're going to find that this has been around for quite a while. It's almost certain that we're going to find a lot of herd immunity, as they want to call it. A lot of exposures, a lot of antibodies, whether you believe the antibody test or not. We're going to find a lot of that. I think we're going to find a lot of that. And if you then get to if you get to the point where you say, well, 50% of people have antibodies to this, then this becomes an exceedingly overblown precaution that we've
100%.
jumped into. And we need to figure out how to get back really fast. If it comes back, hey, only 10% of the population has ever been exposed to this, we have some tough decisions to be made.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. Let me add this here to that, because see, my thing is, and just for full disclosure to the readers, is that I've never been an adherent to germ theory as it presents. I don't believe that viruses are what people say they are in virology. They're exosomes. And I said this back in the first week of March, and then it caught some stuff and other people are out there talking about, which is good. But we're using exosomes to study for longevity and stuff. Exosomes are these little molecule separations, right, that are emitted from a vesicle that are cellular signaling mechanisms. And you know what they look like? They look just like the picture that everyone's showing. They're these round little membranes with genetic material in the middle with all these little spiky outcroppings. They're called exosomes. So here's the deal.
We learned in medical school way back when I went to medical school, aged myself a little bit, that exocytosis was just waste products. And so that's what we all believed. And then, when they started using stem cells a lot, they realized that the efficacy of the stem cells had a lot to do with their exosomes, because the stem cells were all dying really quickly.
Right on. So this isn't something that's new. It's just changing your point of view. So I do believe that, air quotes, viruses are real. They're not living. That's why they can't replicate on their own. They're not going to live on surfaces. But our bodies, everybody always talks about the microbiome. We also have the virome. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of, air quotes, virus in the body. They're signaling mechanisms. And yes, when you or put them out like a slug makes a slug trail, okay? That's how we can track them down, so we can put salt on them to shrink them up. Anyways, it's a sudden thing, or make bait. So anyways, my point of that is that, yes, when people get ill or sick and have exudate, it can transmit. The question is why and how. And here's the thing. It's not a bad thing. This is why one of the last things I was going to share was, we've all seen this flattening the curve concept, right? This flatten the curve, right? Number of cases. If without measures to slow the spread, okay, of these exosomes, it goes up. And this was all a matter of capacity. See that line through the middle? Capacity of the healthcare system. And what you do is on the blue one is you want to, with measures to slow the spread, it spreads it out. But you know what it also does? It triples the duration that we have to deal with it. So I'm not a fan of flattening the curve at all. Mine has always been, don't social distance. Get out and about. Rock that herd immunity. Spike it and be done with it. Don't sit there and spread it out. And flattening the curve is a ruse, because it was done under the presupposition that the healthcare system couldn't handle it. History, data, and precedent showed me from CDC data points that we, for decades, have been able to handle the volume with our current healthcare system.
Right. Well, I think it speaks to how how inflated the models were to begin with. Because if you think about
damn lies,
if you think about 2 million deaths, well, even with a death rate of 10%, which would just be as high as just about anything out there, that would be a crazy high death rate. Well, then you still have to have 20 million cases in the hospital, essentially, which means you have to, and if that's only 5%, or let's say they thought maybe it was 20%, well, you're still talking about now you need 100 million cases of this to have 20 million hospitalizations and 2 million deaths. So
Yep.
that's why you and I were both just kind of scratching our heads at the beginning. Well, I don't really see how these numbers can happen. Now, we've been saying from the beginning, like, maybe we're morons and this whole thing's going to blow up.
And I was open to that 2%
like, man, we really
chance.
missed something there. Time to go back to school. But, it's turning out to be more in line with what we thought from the beginning. And that's good news for everybody.
100%. But
nobody wants deaths. And so regardless of what's, regardless if this came from a bat or if this is, some other entity, if people want to believe 5G or, what other aspects, let's wrap this up let's talk about what, given the times that we're in, the amount of control or lack thereof that we have over our, the freedoms we've lost, the freedoms we've acquiesced on, obviously you and I can't prescribe policy, but what can people do to keep themselves healthy, keep their immunity high? I know you're about as much of a fan of all these immune building supplements as I am. What can people do? Like, what behaviors do you know of, since you come at this from a different perspective? What behaviors should people be thinking about engaging in, regardless of what's going on, but just saying, hey, there's a risk to my health and the health of the other people that I love and care about. That immune function and contagia and all these things are playing into it. What do you tell the naive, and I don't mean not as ignorant, just somebody who has no opinion on this? What do you tell these people? All right, here's the best use of your time, your mental energy, your physical energy, and here are the things that you should be gravitating for just to make yourself a healthier human being while this is all going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, if I could shameless plug Balanced Protocol, my method. The bottom line is this, okay?
No shame necessary. Just plug it.
So nice. So here's the thing. What happens is really simple. Just like depression is not a Prozac deficiency. Okay?
Exactly.
No. Okay? Well, guess what? The immune system is systems. There's multiple ones. And no, 80, 90% is not in the gut. That's baloney also. Okay? Because guess what? We're now learning about the lungs and the respiratory things, and the ACE2 receptors in the lungs are part of the immune system too. So they can just go and suck it, all those sales funnel summit heads. My point is this. It's always been 4 factors, not just one factor, but 4 factors. Environment, lifestyle, mindset, and nutrition, right? So environment, air, water, light, sound, EMF, and food. Lifestyle, connection, sleep hygiene. You know a lot about, right? So movement, exercise, connection, all the things that you do as decisions with your lifestyle. Now your mindset has to come into be. This is why I'm a big fan of Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance. You can create things and problems with your immune system if your mind said, "Oh my God, I'm gonna get COVID,
Right.
and all that." And if you can be so worried, you're pregnant because you missed your period, you'll continue to miss your period. You'll be so scared to give a doggone a talk, that you'll freeze up, or you're so scared you can piss your pants. We know the mind has a physiological effect. If you're focusing on, oh my God, there's going to be 2 million people, and you're freaking out, you're going to freak out. So the mindset has to get corrected, okay? Your nutrition has to be solid, okay? All these fad diets of carnivore, vegan, schmegan, all that. Listen, you got to quantify you and where you're at, okay? You don't just go like that fat chiropractor who told everybody to drink a bunch of tonic water and drink high doses of zinc, or these other people, all you need. Listen, people don't get these exosome infections, these viral infections, because you don't pop enough zinc pills that you're not drinking, because just like depression's not a Prozac deficiency, you can't just go and say, and I appreciate Dr. Shiva, but you can't just go and preemptively go, I'm going to take a bunch of vitamin A, a bunch of D, a bunch of C, and that. You got to do way more than that, right? You got to get in the sunshine. You got to stay hydrated. You got to get connected to the earth. You got to sleep. You got to eat healthful sources of food. In other words, it's a lot. It's a bigger thing. The people that this gets hit are the ones that are immunocompromised. And you know what? There's even immunocompromised people who aren't even dying from it, for freak's sake, right?
Right.
So you're not going to protect yourself by drinking a whole bunch of Four Sigmatic mushroom coffee. I'm sorry, but you're not. It's not going to do it. Matter
Right.
of fact, you can create immunological imbalances from a lot of these supplements. You can push over your T helper cell 1, 2, 17, and 22. You can push yourself into the wrong area and now actually, in your very attempts to support the immune systems with the pills, potions, and powders, actually compromise your immune system. It's always about balance. So here's what it is.
Yeah.
Back to the stuff that you should be doing anyways. We had a 30-day trial of socialism to teach everybody to wash their damn hands and don't be spitting all over everybody, for flip's sake. I mean, oh my God. And just when we had some socialism, Bernie bails out. But the thing is that that's what people need to do. Take tremendous comfort in this. And what you need to realize is not let this pandemic spin into a trade, a quid pro quo, if you will, exchange for your constitutional rights.
You're so political.
I know what you're talking about. This is just the new lingo. You don't want to start trading stuff based upon false presuppositions. So that's why that's why I love you to death, my brother from another mother, is people need to remember the reason why we have the Constitution is to keep us sober when the shit hits the fan like it is blazing right now. Right? Don't buy into this stuff. And remember, it was a big nothing burger. I personally am unabashedly saying it's the biggest hoax and fraud scam ever perpetuated to mankind. Okay? Okay, fine. Disagree with me no matter what. Look at the numbers.
I mean, there are plenty of people who agree with you, and you know but I think that the take home point that I want to end this with is, I mean, without any preparation, as you as my witness here, we both came up with exactly the same thing. Guess what? It's the same shit we've been telling you every day for the last 15, 20 years. Like, it's, it's the same tenets of health are the same. They're the same. They're the same. They're the same. Yep. And the healthier you are when you're going through this, and whatever the stressor is on you, whether it's the fear, the nocebo effect, from the fear, whether it's the economic fear of not being able to work, if it's hating the people you live with and having to live with them, like not hating necessarily, but like my one of my sons is in college, and he has 6 roommates because he lives there's 6 of them total. So it's 5 roommates because they live in LA, and it's like $6,000 a month for an apartment, So he has all these roommates, and now he's sequestered with guys that he's okay sleeping under the same roof with, but doesn't necessarily want to hang out with these guys all day, every day, right? And so it's the same thing, regardless of what's going to bring you down, whether it's the depression, God forbid, suicidality that's going to come into.
That's going to be a big
economic
problem,
hardships. There's health scare. There's problems of health concerns. Regardless if it's COVID or anything else. Right. And you have to. I mean, I say I break it down into exercise or activity. Like, if you're not an exerciser, now's not the time to start doing CrossFit in your backyard or anything like that. It's like, be active in proportion to your fitness level. Eat food that's made out of a single ingredient. Eat stuff that your great grandparents would have recognized as food. Boom. And obviously take care of your sleep and take care of your mindset or your stress mitigation, mindfulness, whatever you want to call that. Right. I don't cover as much about environment as you do, because that's an area of expertise I don't share with you. But just keep doing the same damn things. Do your own research. Stay away from the hyperbole. Every time you see a number, what's the denominator compared to what, relative to what? Okay, we've had however many thousands of deaths now. I haven't kept up with the numbers as well as I had. Are we close to 20,000 deaths or something like that?
No, it's more than that. We're pushing. We're climbing up there, mid 20s.
Okay, so 20,000 deaths we're currently sitting at. 25,000 deaths we're currently sitting in. In addition to what was adding up to be a rough flu season that's already dropped off, and this is now making up. So, a bad flu season is 60,000 deaths. So relative to what? Do we have 20,000 in the flu and 30,000 with this, and we end up with 50,000? Now we're in a normal flu season.
Right.
That goes out to 60, 70,000. Like 70,000, it's like, okay, we're a little worse off. But as we've been talking about, there's a net gain of life because people dying
Absolutely.
from other, not dying from other causes.
Well, this time of the last 4 years, we're actually down 15% in deaths.
Right. So, take everything in stride.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the denominator. The denominator is so important relative to what, compared to what, out of a total of what. We need to know what we're comparing things to, and take care of your health and stay informed with data, not news. Yeah.
And 100%, because I've always said that fear is the currency of control.
Yeah.
And you can always tell someone who's riddled in fear because they're going to be angry. They're going to attack you for having a disagreement or not following the current narrative, and encouraging you to tattle on your neighbors and to do all the Nazi techniques of telling where people are hiding or not complying with the hate of the time. And so this is more about control than anything else. Once we come out of this, which we all, I said it in May, would all be done by May, that it's everything you just said. We don't have, now is not the time to relinquish control.
Right. Well, that time is never, I believe, but
Amen.
That's a personal belief system. I have no, that's not a medical belief, but my personal belief is that, I would always rather have control of my own power, my own destiny to the highest degree possible. And,
we have
that's
a
my
very
belief
cool
system.
document that helps, keep that in place. It's called the Constitution.
All right, brother.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Doc. I
this.
appreciate you,
We
brother,
went
man.
really
It's
long.
good as always. I want to let everybody know that I personally thank you for being a great person on the other end of the phone to be my isolation quarantine buddy.
I mean, you're the you're the shiny object of the day for me. It's just like the light at the end of the tunnel is having somebody that I can share my opinions with without getting completely lambasted. I got just torn apart today for not having enough bona fides to weigh into, whether or not it was going to be hard to restart the economy.
It's going to be easy. Just go back to work. Just get in your car and go to work and get busy. I'm looking forward. I think we're going to come out of this like a boss.
Well, I hope you're right.
History, data, and precedent shows me that. The market didn't do the tumble. The other thing is, right now, as bad as it is, this is the best it ever was under the previous administration.
Well, not joblessness. We're up to like 30 million.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep.
All right.
We're back to.
All right, we're getting off medicine. I'm going to break out of this.
But in other words, it's hope, it's comfort. We're going to come out of this. It's going to be wonderful. The battle to maintain our rights is where we're going into now. We'll do that as a follow-up.
I think we're going to lose. We're going to lose like 10% of restaurants, or some things like that.
But you can always open a business back.
I mean, even the Great Depression. I know the Great Depression. In order to weather that storm and have your stocks be a positive value again, you only had to hold on to your stocks for eight and a half years.
Yeah.
That's the biggest crash that everybody's afraid of. It's like, well, I mean, we've had almost that a couple of times in my lifetime already.
Yeah.
At least 4 to 5 years of everything being down. So
I have faith in the American dream.
The difference also being is that we aren't losing all the resources like you did in a world war, like World War I, World War II. It's like destroyed the whole damn world,
right?
And everything had to be rebuilt. Like nothing needs to be rebuilt. We just need to say, all right, go back to work, and here's how we're going to do it.
Man, you know how much people are going to be spending first and foremost with all our hairdressers? They're getting ready to get rich. All right, Doc. Well, we'll end it there, man. I love you the best, man.
Yeah, great seeing you.
All right, man.